Are you ready to embark on a transformative journey of rebuilding your life? Look no further than the Rebuild Podcast. Join us as we dive deep into conversations that nurture personal and spiritual growth. Through the wisdom of the Word of God and practical applications, we'll guide you towards becoming the best version of yourself. On this podcast, we will delve into a variety of topics and insights, ranging from mental and emotional well-being to personal development and spiritual growth. Together, we'll explore the paths to healing, resilience, and the restoration of inner peace. Subscribe now and let's rebuild our lives together, one uplifting conversation at a time.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Rebuild Podcast. I'm your host, Sean Romy, and today I'd like to talk about love. Discovering love, finding love, building love, cultivating love. In essence, the journey to finding or being around or, being able to cultivate a relationship with your soulmate, your significant other. And the reason I wanted to talk about this, I think of this in a very multifaceted aspect. I think this is one of those topics, I think in all honesty, that really requires a lot of attention. I do understand that I usually try to keep this within a certain length of time. And if it gets to a point where it drags on, then I'll try to build off of that, maybe going into the next episode. But with regard to love, and I think we had an episode that talked about that, different types of love, from friendship and familiarity to family to intimacy to the agape love that we oftentimes hear about. And in this, in discovering or finding, dealing with soulmates and our significant others, if you will, I think this is one of those that requires us to really understand all of the elements of the different types of love. Not just that, but also understanding, I think, the dynamic behind what love is supposed to do, right? Just in and of itself, what that's supposed to look like. So I want to talk about that, being able to, align ourselves up appropriately. Do understand that as I talk about this, I'm also going to try to find ways to incorporate other elements of unity in the sense of love. Right, and it might sound somewhat like that previous episode, and I believe this was early on during the podcast's production, if you will. If you want to go back and look at that, you most definitely can, or listen to, I'm sorry. But definitely, I want to incorporate, understanding the dynamic of love from an individualistic perspective as well. I think that is a huge thing. Right, because I think sometimes we still, as a people, we still struggle with what we're taught in the Word and how to apply it in a practical sense, especially when it comes to love. I think a lot of us really struggle with that foundation, how to build or really how to carry out a truly healthy relationship. And I think as the type of people that we're trying to become over the course of our journeys, I think this is, like I said, this is one that really needs to have a lot of emphasis and focus put on it. So I would like to go ahead and get started. So without further ado, let's go ahead and jump right into this. Okay, first things first, understanding when it comes to the dynamic of relationships and connectivity and connection are by far two of the most important elements to God's will and purpose. And in the way that we understand the dynamic of creation, how everything worked together, even in getting into the dynamic of how God created the man and the woman and how that dynamic works together. So we understand that there's a purpose in connectivity. There is a purpose in relationship. And we do need to understand how that dynamic is necessary. Okay, first things first, when looking at what happens with the creation of man and woman, right, we have to understand the representation of both the man and the woman in more than one sense. Okay? The man has a representation of things in the natural, and the woman has a representation of things in the spirit. There's also a representation, if you really want to go further into this, where the man is required to tend to the spirit, the garden, if you will. And the garden is also a representation of the spirit. When you look at what the woman is required to do, it is a lot the same. Her responsibility is to tend to the man. And in both cases, the ability to tend to the other side is necessary in order for life to be cultivated. Okay? One of the most classic senses of this particular dynamic can be found in Proverbs chapter 31. In fact, I think a lot of people get into talking about the Proverbs 31 woman and how the Proverbs 31 woman should be. You know, we should strive as women folk should strive to be the Proverbs 31 woman. And for a lot of the way that we teach this, not just teaching that the Proverbs 31 woman is the woman to be taken into, extreme focus, but we oftentimes put the Ephesians 5 man with the Proverbs 31 woman. It's not a bad thing. Right? I'm not gonna knock that. However, the Ephesians 5 man is tied into the Ephesians 5 woman. And understanding the responsibility that plays in Ephesians 5 is metaphorically utilized if you want to go down that path in Proverbs 31. So notice that there really is no Proverbs 31 man or Proverbs 32 man, right? The book ends with this description of that woman. And in all reality, if you go back and look at the very beginning again, looking at what the requirement was Adam was given by God, it was to tend to the garden. And understanding that representation, you would understand then that your responsibility as Proverbs 31 man would be to tend to the Proverbs 31 woman. Cultivate and prepare yourself for that, to know what that Proverbs 31 woman looks like. And in order to be that Proverbs 31 man, you should know what the Proverbs 31 woman needs in order to fulfill her purpose. And you're able to tend and provide to them. Okay. I do recommend reading Proverbs 31. That is something definitely to take a look at. But do understand, when talking about the Proverbs 31 woman, if you're wanting to be the Proverbs 31 man, your job is to essentially tend to her. Okay? I want to throw that out there. But it does provide a great foundation, if you will, for what a healthy relationship is, or what a lasting relationship should be. And like I said, I think this is one of the reasons why we struggle in this dynamic, right? Because a lot of us are familiar with the concept of love. And yes, love is a very, very big thing, and a very key thing. But a lot of us are also put in positions where we take the feeling of love and we work the emotional aspect of love and marriage and soulmatism and all of that into this aspect that God created that, only takes the emotional part, if you will, and really makes it one aspect to this very grand element that is, again, the relationship. Right? Relationship takes cultivation, it takes work, it takes a lot of tending to, and it takes a lot of tilling and nurturing. Essentially like what you would have to do when tending to a garden. And for a lot of us, in a proverbial sense, not in nothing disrespectful behind it, but a lot of us, proverbially speaking, probably have never tended to a garden before, let alone in a literal sense. There's a good chance we probably haven't tended to a garden before, or having to do some type of agricultural work. And it's understandable, and there's nothing wrong with it, right? But again, from the metaphoric aspect, right, being able to tend to your lawns, or tend to your fields, tend to your gardens, right? All of the things necessary to ensure that your results, your harvest, come out to bloom appropriately, right? Your lawns look luscious and green and beautiful. It takes a lot of work, right? And the way that our relationship should work is in that same vein. Okay, Amos chapter 3 and verse 3 talk about, can two walk together except they be agreed? And one of the things that makes what Proverbs 31 and the tending and, that whole aspect as necessary as it is really understanding that in order to bring about the happiness or the result or the fruit that we're asking for, we're really going to have to put in the work, right? And for a lot of us, we tie a lot of the dynamic of, bearing a burden. You're gonna tend to my needs and my wants and my desires, and my this and my that, and that's great. But how many of us have really been taught to tend to another person's needs or wants or desires, right? And again, it's not to speak negatively or bad on the society as a whole or the body of Christ as a whole, but it has been something that we've really missed big time behind, right? Because we understand that the dynamic of being yoked equally, right? We talk about being unequally yoked in a lot of different capacities. You're talking about a believer to a non-believer, maybe a person that's ambitious to a person that might not seem to be ambitious, whatever the case may be, right? You're working on trying to find a way to see and be eye to eye, visions and plans and directions and all these other things. There's so much that we push out and we expect, and a lot of us really don't know in a lot of cases what it looks like to have to be in that position, right? And from this standpoint, this is, going back into the dynamic of creation. I think this is one of the reasons why, we have to understand the dynamic of how we were created. Being both spirit and natural as the individual, right? And going back and looking at the dynamic of Ephesians 5, if I understand the responsibility that the natural has and the spiritual has, it's not so much to have the two being domineering or controlling over one another. They're both needed in order to fulfill God's will and purpose, right? And somehow we manage to make that, we manage to put the two into this unrealistic hierarchy, if you will. And there's a lot of work and tug and pull and resistance and resentment in a lot of cases. And it's hard for us to fulfill Amos 3 and 3 being agreed, because we're wanting what we want. And there's other factors that go into that too. There's family bloodline, there's trauma, there's generational curses, et cetera, that we have to deal with in regard to that. And I understand that. But we do have to, again, understand that in order for us to understand the dynamic of how to work together, we have to know in all reality that our responsibilities in terms of building and dating and learning and cultivating a relationship with one another is we're serving each other. We are working together. We're tending to each other. Right? And I think we kind of miss that because we focus and fixate more on one aspect of what we think a relationship is as a whole. And we make that the thing as opposed to really looking at everything that comes with being in a relationship or being connected to a person. Right? So how then do we put ourselves in that position? Well, obviously, we want to align ourselves, if you will, in the right kind of manner. Right? And the first thing to do in regard to doing this is to be honest and transparent with ourselves. Right? And I think we should teach that more so than anything else. I'll be honest, during my time on this earth, and this is one of those lessons that I learned the hard way, but I really wish I would have learned this first. And that's putting in a lot of time, again, for self-reflection. That's putting in a lot of time of inner working and really building and healing and mending and finding wholeness and getting closure in certain areas and things of this sort, because what doesn't get resolved or what might not be taken care of or whatever, loose ends there may be, when you do end up in a relationship, those things will come out. Right? And if we're not big picture enough in terms of understanding that, we can create resentment with our significant other. Right? The other person might think that the only thing that ever comes out of the situation with them is you're bringing out the worst in them, or they're bringing out the worst in you. And, we're not looking at it and seeing it as an opportunity to learn and grow. We're not seeing it as an opportunity to heal or gain closure or anything of the sort. Right? And again, that for us, we have to learn how to be whole, how to tend to those things, right? Because that's the only way that we'll be able to recognize, being able to find some of the root causes to some of the things that are holding us back. And we talked about that in other episodes. 2 Corinthians 13:5 tells us to examine ourselves, whether we be in the faith, prove our own selves. Know you not your own selves, how that Jesus Christ is in you, except you be reprobate. Right? And think about that. Like, how would we know what's in us if we're not allowing ourselves the opportunity to really find out what's in us? And I know in today's society, we have so much going on. There's, we have work and bills and family and this and that, and we're always so much on the go that we really don't have or create a lot of time to reflect or to check or to examine or to test ourselves and really be transparent and honest with ourselves in a lot of cases, which is very dangerous, right? Because we're not putting ourselves in a position to really, to handle the maintenance, if you will. Think of it like a car, right? Just imagine you get a car and you're just driving your car, and the only thing that you really do to the car is you put gas in it and you change the oil. So, you could be driving on bad brakes because you don't want to pay the money to get the brakes done, even though you know that you need to get the brakes done, right? And the longer you deny that happening, the more dangerous of a position you can find yourself in, right? Your rotors might get messed up. You might have to change your rotors out. If you decide not to get certain filters checked out or changed, you might end up having a problem getting the car to run appropriately, right? Maybe your car doesn't start the same way because you didn't check your spark plugs to make sure that they hadn't run their course. Little things along that line, right? You're just ignoring those things because, the car still turns on and I can still get from point A to point B. That's great. But if I want my car to last me a long time, then I definitely want to make sure that I'm maintaining it. That means I have to know the ins and outs of my car. I have to know certain things about what my car needs, listen for certain sounds, be in tune with what certain things might sound like or how they come across, or maybe certain signals that might be on my dashboard, right? And for us, it's the same thing, right? There's no way we should accept, when looking at ourselves and examining ourselves, there's no way that we should accept, well, I have an attitude problem, and I just accept that I have an attitude problem, and not figure out why you have the attitude problem, right? There's no reason why we should allow ourselves to say, well, I'm just a victim. I'm an innocent victim of the circumstances surrounding me, and, woe is me and I'm helpless and there's nothing I can do about it. That's just the way of the world. There's no way that I should allow myself to be in that position, because, again, how would I be able to help another person or tend to that person? Because imagine them being in the same position, and now we're just two broken people that are connected to each other and we don't know how to heal each other, let alone heal ourselves, right? So we have to be mindful of that, right? We do also want to understand from a bigger picture just as much. We want to allow ourselves an opportunity to know more so about the purpose, again, of why that soulmate, if you will, is who they're supposed to be, right? The concept of a soulmate, which we kind of alluded to earlier, right? It's essentially being able to tend to one another, to fulfill God's will and purpose. And in fulfilling that will and purpose and tending to, as we would a garden, we're taking into account being able to pull up the proverbial weeds or the tares to allow the harvest to grow and be full, right? We're sowing into our significant other, right? We're able to cultivate them, water them, feed into them, pour into them. And again, we're taught, right, those are things that we're supposed to do, but we never really talk about how to do it. And so one of the things that can hurt us from this standpoint, especially because of how we teach it, is we should expect someone to give to us, right? And we'll say on the other side, well, yeah, I'll be able to give it. But if I don't know what giving it looks like, or understanding how to give it, right? And I think one of the great things that we should really learn in regard to this, and I'll utilize a lesson that I kind of learned the hard way, but it does make sense. Personality tests, right? And this kind of ties back into the first point, right? Self-reflection in the work. If I know who I am, and I know what my strengths and my weaknesses are, then I know what I'm looking for in terms of what can help me, right? And I think, again, this is also one of those where we can learn just as much about other people in the same regard, right? One of the things that I had learned in one of the relationships that I had been in, as it pertains to the languages, the five love languages, if you will, I realized that there's from my own personal result, there were a lot more balancing elements, right? There wasn't one that really stuck out more than the other. But I will say that one of the things that was the least on my list was receiving gifts. But everything else was pretty much, right there. And I value the little things like quality time and the physical touch and the words of affirmation. Those things were nice. And when I started to realize and understand what those things were, what they represented, and having the opportunity to really get insight on how to give them just as much as how to receive them, I realized that the situation that I was in wasn't healthy. And this isn't to speak negative on the person that I was attached to on the other side, right? It's just going through a process of really not understanding, right, how important these things are, right? Because that's another thing that hurts us, right? And we talk about soulmates and looking for certain things that make us feel a certain kind of way, and we're used to, we're accustomed to having people try to tend to what we want or need, but many of us, again, aren't really taught on how to be a tender or a giver to, or a cultivator of, right? And I realized, for the person that I was with, one of the things that was major for them, or two of the things that was major for them was gifts and gifts and words of affirmation. And this is one of those points that I realized, even though I was more so used to receiving than giving, because of how broken I was, I didn't really know how to give it. I didn't know how to give. I knew how to give in friendly situations and maybe in a flirtatious sense to kind of showcase to you that I really liked you, but really, being able to really get to know and get, build into another person. And I'm not going to say that it was easy either, because, again, brokennesses and other things of the sort, it really made it difficult to find out what the other person really liked, right? And so it was always easy when it was, it was something not appreciated or it was something wrong, but, trying to find what worked was really difficult, and trying to give according to what that person's number one. Right, and we hear about it and it's talked about in books in a lot of different ways. And this is, again, one of those reasons why I say, for a lot of us, we have to understand that God's word is practical. So yes, take the time to go and look at some of those assessments and read what it looks like to do those things, so you don't find yourself in a difficult spot. But in the same token, do other things along that line too, right? So the person on the other side doesn't just get what you would expect, right? And I think that's another thing that hurts us sometimes, right? Is a lot of times we get things or we do things and we're saying that we're doing it for the other person, but the realism is we're really doing it for ourselves, right? And that could be some real backhanded type stuff, but I won't get into that too much. Right, so we have to understand when it comes to the soulmate, finding the purpose behind that soulmate. When we talk about tending to, as we talked about earlier, we have to understand what that brings. And if you're familiar with the story of Adam and Eve, Genesis 2:18, right? The Lord says that it's not good that the man should be alone, and I'll make him and help me. And everybody knows about help me, right? And well, yeah, the help me. We say it, but again, we kind of miss what the helpmeet really is, right? And that's a tender, that's a cultivator, just as much as the man is. And I like I said, I've really taken the time studying this and learning this and looking at this and seeing this from this perspective. It really becomes mind blowing, right? Because we've missed it, right? Yeah, we put the women in a position. You're just to help me. I'm the visionary. I'm the this. I'm the that, and I'm gonna do all of this stuff, and you're just gonna help me do it. Like, no, understand. We both have to be on the same page. I have to be able to tend to you, and whatever I'm bringing to tend to you has to be able to produce a harvest necessary for you to fulfill your purpose, but also to help me and cultivate me and help me to fulfill mine. It's a mutual thing if you really want to go down that path. And if we want to take that and open that up into a spiritual context too, which also helps, you're talking about from a spiritual place too, having a connection in that regard, so we can understand each other from that place, right? That there's a lot of reason as to why, when it comes to the dynamic, right, of what Amos 3:3 was talking about, being on the same page and having the responsibility of cultivating and tending to someone else. When we really sit down and think about it, there's a lot that goes into the dynamic, really, of connecting with another person. And I know for a lot of us, and I don't want to get too far ahead of myself, but when it comes to the dynamic of where we are in today's day and age, where we're finding any and every reason to let go of a person and to disconnect from a person and to reject a person, it makes it that much more difficult to fulfill our purpose as necessary. And we can also create a certain delusion by thinking that we're really doing things in accordance with God's will and purpose. But the reality is we're really just doing things on our own. We're trying to pass that off as God's will and purpose. But I won't go too far into that, right? But we should also understand, and I kind of alluded to this a little bit too, when we're building ourselves, right, as we are reflecting and doing the work, we're also allowing ourselves again to know what our standards are, what our boundaries are, right? I would say this again, and kind of alluding to the story that I told earlier. If I had known, had really taken and understood the dynamic of the 5 love languages, understanding my personality to a greater extent, right, and understanding how my personality meshes with other personalities. And I know a lot of people talk about you can't get into all of that stuff. All of that stuff doesn't matter. It does matter, right? Because there are certain things that, in the grand scheme of things, we try to push and we try to conform ourselves to some type of normality, and we can find a lot of people becoming very resentful over the course of time, right? And I'll utilize as a great example, when I was at the church that I was in San Diego, one of the things that I slowly started to become resentful behind was trying to be something that I wasn't. Because everybody around me kept telling me about having this bold voice, and I gotta be this, and because of my physical stature, I have to come across as this guy, and I have to be, all of this stuff. And it's not to say that I don't have that capability, right? But understanding why God made me the way He made me, understanding the patience and the all of the things along that line that I had to go through, I realized that it was necessary in some cases to be reserved. And I'll be honest with you, sometimes if I do get loose, and if you haven't noticed, if you've been listening to the podcast up to this point, if I do really get into the dynamic of allowing myself to flow. I can flow, and I can talk your head off, right? As a matter of fact, I had actually, I remember I went through a group, an anger management group, around the same time that I was at this church, and when I graduated, one of the things I was told. One of the things I was told by one of the guys that was in the class with me was, you're a very knowledgeable guy, but you could be real long-winded. And I kind of laughed at it, but I thought about it, and I was like, no, it does make a lot of sense. If I'm very passionate about something, or if I'm really comfortable, which I was in that class, because it was one of the few spaces up to that point just in my life where I felt safe enough to just be able to express how I felt without judgment. And yeah, I could talk your ear off. And it makes sense, right? But in an otherwise, normal situation, you might not really get much from me, right? I might be reserved. I might be quiet. I might just sit back. I might just observe things. I might, just study and kind of watch how everything plays out, right? And I'm realizing more so that's necessary, especially in a day and age such as this, right? Where we have so many people that are trying to be seen and heard and wanting to be seen and heard. And even though I can talk a person's ear off, I'm also realizing, again, the reservations that I have too in putting, being able to put some stuff out. Case in point with this podcast, I should be putting this out on more platforms, but I haven't really chosen to, right? Out of fear of judgment and a whole bunch of other things. But that's a personal thing I'm still working through. Okay, but along with that, right? That same aspect, right? Still focusing on building and becoming a better version of self, again, allows me to now see what to look for. And I've seen it being put into certain situations. And as a matter of fact, one of the first relationships I had gotten into, I had, every intention on building off of the lessons that I learned from the previous relationship. That's something that I'd always tried to work on doing, just in general. Any type of situation I find myself in, I want to build off of. And what ended up happening is I found myself in a very compromising situation. And it reminded me of the previous relationship I was in. And I literally just shut down, and I left, and I didn't say another word. And it was kind of disappointing, in the grand scheme of things, because I really didn't allow for room for understanding, on my end, right? And I do understand that, that's the reality. Again, as we talked about earlier, right? If we have things that are unresolved or things that don't get taken care of appropriately, they will come out, right? And then that kind of thing did happen. And, even though I had set a boundary at that point, it still could have been handled a different way, right? And from that, like I said, this growth, this lesson learned, it allows to put myself in a position to say, okay, well, I know what I liked, I know what I didn't like, and I'm not going to say just that as soon as I see it, I should just disconnect from it altogether, but I will, if I really do care and I really am trying to invest, then I'm going to try to dig in and look for answers, search for answers, get to the roots and the bottoms of certain things, because it's necessary. Right, and we have to be mindful of that. Okay, we do have to understand that those things are necessary. And like I said, I know in today's day and age, we put a lot of emphasis, we put a lot of stock on, as soon as we see something wrong, as soon as somebody says something or does something, we just immediately cut them off, and that's just it. But the downside to that is if we don't know why it's happening, we can find ourselves really burning a lot of bridges, and eventually we'll end up alone. And even if you do find yourself connected with a person, if that person is only tolerating you just as much as you're tolerating them, then again, you're going to find yourself alone. And that's the last place you really want to be, right? So, allow yourself to build and to grow and to, again, heal and to reflect and work on those types of things so that you're opening the door for the type of growth and the type of people necessary to help bring the best out of you just as much as you're bringing the best out of them, and also bringing out the worst. And I know for a lot of us, that doesn't sound very pretty or cliche, or it doesn't sound like the greatest thing to hear, but in all reality, all of those things that need to be improved on, they need to come out too. And if the person is really invested in you and they're really wanting what's best for you, they're going to allow for those things to come out too, just as much as you want those things to come out from that person. And if not, as we kind of teach in the world that we live in, right, we kind of teach the delusion that love brings out all the good stuff. Love brings out everything, right? God's will brings out everything. And I'll leave that alone, but you understand that is very important. And as a matter of fact, Philippians 4:8 talks about that, right? Finally, brethren, whatsoever things are true, whatsoever things are honest, whatsoever things are just, whatsoever things are pure, whatsoever things are lovely, whatsoever things are of good report, if there be any virtue and if there be any praise, think on these things. Yes, it does go into a closure of things being, all of these positive elements. But if we're talking truth, in all reality, there are going to be some things that are going to hurt, right? But it's necessary to go through those processes. Again, the truth will set us free, and we'll be free and free indeed. And in order for us to be free, we do have to remove some of those bandages and heal appropriately, right? And again, all of that allows for us to bring forth the right person, right? And even in those positions when we are dealing with the person that we're dealing with, if they're really invested in us and they recognize that there's something wrong, they'll know exactly how to deal with whatever's going on. Oh, okay, normally he needs time to himself, or she needs time to herself. Okay, nothing wrong with that. Perfectly fine. I'll give you that time. Oh, okay, it just needs a second or two. We can talk about this a little bit later. Okay. Or, maybe just finding, okay, I just need to pull you out of this thing. Right? And we have to be mindful of those types of things too. Okay. Next thing, we want to take into consideration, right, is timing. Sometimes we can fight for a certain person, certain relationship, certain type of thing, and it might not be God's will and purpose, or the opportunity that might have been perfect might have come and gone, right? And those things happen, okay? But we also have to understand the importance of patience in going through this process, right? Because again, the last thing we want to do is put ourselves in a compromising position, right? Sometimes, we get excited about having an opportunity to be with a person that we were really looking forward to, and we might have grown in a different direction. We might have grown in two completely different directions. It happens, right? It could be a situation where, that person might have certain deal breakers, right? It might have been, it might not have worked out in the first case, but, even moving later on, hey, well, you were married once and I wasn't. And I would feel as if, you'd be doing me a disservice by being married, or, oh, you might have kids, that might be a deal breaker. Like, everything might have been perfect, but, this is going on, or whatever the case may be. Right now, I'll be honest, there are a lot of factors like that. I'll be honest, in my own life, I've noticed in a lot of situations that there are a lot of people that I had interest in at one point in time. Maybe not admitted to it at one, in those days, but sitting down now and looking back at how maybe the person carries themselves, or looking at my own situation and how things have gone out, it's like, I don't know if I'd even be in the same boat, let alone received in a similar fashion, because of how we've grown over the course of time, right? How things have developed and played out, and it's understandable, okay? But we do want to, allow ourselves, again, to trust that divine timing, right? Maybe it is in God's will for us to be with that person. Maybe we just needed to build on some things and work on some things, and maybe they needed to be in the same boat, right? Again, we talk about Romans 8:28, right? All things work together for the good of them that love the Lord, right? And understanding that we do get to a point where we can see how, when we look at the tests and trials over time, those tests and trials might not be there just for us to heal, but they might be there for us to maybe help the other person that we're connected to heal, right? Because they might not be able to see that there's a problem, or they might not know how to dig and find the root, right? And it might be a situation where it allows them to open up in a way that they've never been able to before, because they're seeing now and understanding now that you're really truly interested in it, right? Ecclesiastes 3:1 tells us, to everything there's a season, and a time and a time to every purpose under the heaven. So again, we might not realize that, hey, maybe, going through X, Y, and Z situation was a preparation for me to deal with maybe that type of heartbreak. Maybe it was to allow me to empathize with where you're coming from. Maybe it was to allow for me to recognize that, this problem is something that is common, right? It could be something to open the door for me to again, be able to know how to tend to that type of thing. And it's necessary, right? Again, we talk about Romans 8:28. All things work together for the good of them that love the Lord, right? To them who are called according to his purpose. If we're called to his purpose, then we understand, again, going back to the concept of the relationship and to the connection, we're understanding that we're tending to each other. We're holding and helping each other. We're cultivating, we're watering. We're sifting, right? Taking what's, the true harvest and what's the tare or the weed, right? And we're separating them. We're allowing the processes to happen as they're supposed to, and allowing ourselves the patience and understanding of recognizing what's really that person and what's deeper than that person, right? We have to be mindful of that too, right? And I think, again, the way that we talk about in society, a lot of those things working the way that they work, we kind of miss that, right? Again, anytime something happens, anytime something is said, we take that and we're straight into, we're dissecting and calling the person out and everything else under the sun, right? But heaven forbid we're the ones that cross that line, right? We're doing everything we possibly can to defend ourselves against it. No, it wasn't that. No, I didn't mean this. And I wasn't trying to do this. It was this, and da 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 da. It's a weird imbalance, right? We don't want to do that, right? Again, we want to understand that these things are necessary, and we're finding ways to see and understand again what that purpose is in what we're experiencing when it comes to the divine timing. Right, and I'm starting to realize and understand this in my own process. Again, when I was younger, I was really looking for love from the standpoint again of the feeling. I wasn't told really anything about what I know about love now, and it is unfortunate that I had to go through a lot of the heartaches and pains that I went through. And I'm not saying that's not my family. I'm not saying that's not the churches and anyone else. I'm just realizing that, for a lot of us, we really aren't taught the true essence of that type of love. Or we don't see how the love that we're accustomed to being taught also can apply in such a manner of cultivating, like building and tending to one another. We push a lot of expectation and receiving. And we forget that, there's servitude from the standpoint of being connected and being in a relationship with another person, whether it's intimate or not. Right? Trusting, in doing that, we should allow ourselves to, again, trust God's timing behind all of this. Yeah, I do wish I would not have had to learn some of the lessons I learned the hard way, but I do also understand that it's a part of a greater purpose. And much to the same element that I think about with Abraham, right? When Abraham and Sarah went through their situation, God reestablished a new covenant. He gave them a new name, and he did all of this new stuff to prepare them for what was supposed to happen. Right? But they were given a second chance to, really trust in God's purpose. And from that moment forward, Abraham really didn't hesitate whenever God said that there was something he needed to do. Right? He didn't take matters into his own hands. He just allowed for God to do what he said, and all right, I'm gonna do it. And for a lot of us in the standpoint of learning and growing and cultivating and building a relationship, it's the same thing. Right? And I know for a lot of us, we hear a lot of different talk. I know there's a lot of preachers out there that really kind of harp on the notion or the idea of getting married and getting remarried, and there's all these different talks behind what's acceptable and what's not. Right? And to that, I do say, in all honesty, you go back and you read God's word and understand what that means, for you. And if God's word says, that's not something that you should do, okay, you deal with it, right? Appropriate. But if the understanding that you have of God's word doesn't put you in a position to where your first relationship or your first situation was considered a failure, and you're able to leave, or understanding the rules of being able to leave, your situation falls under that, then go again, go be happy, go find that person and allow that lesson to be learned. Right? But don't hold yourself hostage in saying, well, that pastor said that. Because I know there's a lot of people that are fixated on that. And like I said, I've seen a lot of stuff behind that. And I know, we're living in a day and age where everybody's really, uncomfortable behind certain elements like that because it's, it can be lost in translation, right? Some people are strictly to the T. Some people try to understand the context. Some people try to hybrid it, right? But whatever, and in understanding big picture, this kind of goes back to, again, the self-reflection and the inner working part, where you might interpret it one way, that might be the way that God is showing you. And he might be giving you that opportunity to build on it. And again, to everything, there's a time and a season, right? We just read that. So do understand that it's a possible, again, position for God to reveal to you what it is he's trying to do. In fact, Proverbs 16:9, right? A man's heart deviseth his way, but the Lord directeth his steps. And if you think about Proverbs 3:5 and 6, along with this, right? If we're trusting God in everything, he's going to allow us to see exactly what it is that we need to see, right? And we don't have to take matters into our own hands and try to go out there and do something that might not, again, be in God's timing, right? I think sometimes that can become discouraging too. I know for a lot of us, we get discouraged behind certain things, right? I know in mainstream society is a great example behind this, right? But a lot of us are taught in order to get over a situation, right? We're supposed to get into another one. Problem with that is you can end up with a lot of extra baggage, and if you haven't healed from that baggage, it's just going to be a bad day all the way around. We don't want to do that, okay? We also don't want to put ourselves in a position to be discouraged, right? We do want to be hopeful, not delusional, but definitely hopeful, right? And don't find discouragement in the process, right? Because that's a huge thing. And trust me, for a lot of us, when we go through, certain separations, we go through certain disconnects, certain divorces, failures, and other things of the sort, we might feel a certain kind of way, right? But Proverbs chapter 37 and verse 4 says, "Delight thyself also in the Lord, and he shall give you the desires of your heart." Now, do understand that those things have to align with God's will and purpose. I think, again, this is another one of those elements that we get taught a lot about. And yeah, we get excited behind, having the things that we want. But in all reality, we want to make sure that the things that we're looking for are in alignment with God's will and purpose. Okay. And I think it's Matthew 6:33 that talks about that, right? Seek ye first the kingdom of God and all his righteousness, and all these things will be added unto you, right? And that also ties again with Proverbs 3:5 and 6. If we're trusting in him and we're allowing him to be the director of our path, he'll make it clear to us what what is necessary for us. And I know we get excited about the for us thing, but we really should be fixated and excited about, again, that alignment aspect, because there are going to be some things in the grand scheme of things that we might miss because we're so fixated on the for us, right? And we might overlook that the situation that we need to get through is necessary to help us with the person that we're connecting ourselves to. And in order for us to be able to not lose out on that person, we have to be able to overcome XYZ situation over here first. Okay. When we are, connected to that person, we're building that relationship. We're nurturing that relationship, right? We want to make sure that, we're doing everything appropriately. And I know a lot of us, we know about the things that we should do, right? I think a lot of the people talk about key things that cause a marriage to fail or cause a relationship to fail. Usually it involves finances, usually it involves communication, and it usually involves intimacy. And I'll be honest with you, those things can play a part, right? But again, also making sure that we're on the same page, because you might not, you might be with a person that really isn't much of a communicator. And so you have to know how to carry yourself with a person like that. You might not be a communicator, but you might be with someone who is a social butterfly. So you're gonna have to know how to navigate through that, right? And it's necessary to, again, as we talked about earlier with the love languages and everything else, we have to know how to tend to those types of people, the people that aren't like us, or the people that we're finding ourselves connected to. What's the point and purpose of being with a person if all I'm thinking of is kind of following whatever the societal norm is? We'll kind of talk about that a little bit later. There's a lot of challenges with regard to this. But, we don't want to put ourselves in a position where we become quiet, right, amongst each other. And as a matter of fact, Ephesians 4:29, right, we talk about open communication, right, and being able to share our practices, right? Let no corrupt communication proceed out of your mouth, but that which is good to the use of edifying, that it may minister grace unto the hearers. You think about who we're connecting ourselves to, right? And think about, again, especially again, you talk about the different types of love languages. If they take words very seriously and they allow the words to really impact their being, imagine you putting a lot of negativity into that person. Pretty soon they're not going to want to hear from you, right? And that's a big deal, right? Now, I remember, if I'm not mistaken, I think it was from this book I read called His Needs, Her Needs, where you take into consideration being connected to another person. The things that they do, the good and the bad, are essentially like, depositing or withdrawing money in the bank. And if you think about it, if I'm pouring into this person and I'm constantly making deposits, then the connectivity, the connection, the intimacy, and everything else should be really good because we're open, right? Whereas if I'm speaking negative or things are going bad or, I'm making life difficult, it'll showcase itself. And it's going to be hard for me to really, have that same type of connection. And I do advise, right, that we learn about that. Like I said, I believe it's that book, His Needs, Her Needs, which I do recommend buying the book, regardless whether it is in there or it isn't. I do recommend that book. I do also say, right, with regard to, the way that we're purposing understanding the dynamic of the two becoming one. And I think this is one that we speak on, but I don't think we really think of in the grand scheme of things. Right? If I'm speaking corrupt, or if I'm speaking evil, or if I'm speaking hurtful, or if I'm speaking deceitful, or if I'm being whatever towards you, I'm really doing it to myself. And if you really think about that, that really becomes the thing, right? Because again, we talk about the two becoming one flesh. So why would I speak bad about myself in that regard, right? And we have to understand that, right? So again, being open, right, in communication, being able to share those things with each other. We want to be honest, and being honest and being destructive are two completely different things. And by me saying that, I'm also not making it acceptable, right? Because I know some people will justify this, and I've been in situations like that before, where I'm just telling it like it is. Yeah, you can't don't say you're telling it like it is and you're coming across as, very crass or very, rude. right? Because that's not going to be received, whether you're right or not, right? And sometimes, we have to find ways to say what we're trying to say and not be so abrasive, if you will. And I know there's a lot of panels and discussion forums that kind of talk about, well, what if I got an issue or a problem and I come talk to you and da-da-da-da-da. And sometimes, we'll talk about it and we're coming from our perspective of, I'm just trying to have a conversation, but you might come across as the type of person, right? Like some of the gang members of older times might be, you're set tripping, right? You might be coming like you're ready to square up on somebody, right? And if that's your approach, then you might have to work on that, right? Going back to fixating and working on self, right? We want to be able to, again, be transparent, but we also have to be considerate too, right? Because those things matter, right? We also want to, again, understand being able to see eye to eye, as we talked about in so many other aspects. We also want to allow ourselves being on the same page and being agreed in the faithful sense too, and also create a lot of intimacy and connection, right? Because we're allowing ourselves to be, relaxed and transparent and vulnerable in everything at that point, right? If I can lay all my cards out on the table, then I can't be surprised by anything. I can't be caught off guard by anything. We can anticipate certain things happening before they become problems. I have a greater understanding of how this is perceived or could be perceived, or I can perceive it a lot better, as opposed to not knowing and then now I'm finding out, and the way I'm finding out is through this heating situation. That's never a good thing, right? We don't want to do that to our partners, and we definitely don't want to do that to each other, right? Song of Solomon: Thou art fair, my love, there is no spot in thee. Come with me from Lebanon, my spouse, with me from Lebanon. Look at the top of Amana, from the top of Shinir and Hermon, from the lion's dens, from the mountains of the leopards. Now, Song of Solomon 4, 7, and 8, this is one of those that this is a redemption, if you will, in terms of, relationship, right? You're talking about a person who feels as if, they're not worthy enough. And so here it is, again, taking an opportunity to invite someone into, the festivities, doing things together, building, connecting, right? And this was Solomon's way of being able to utilize that metaphor for him to, get back into God's will, if you will. Right, and for us, we can still utilize that the same way, right? Hey, if I'm really there for you, if I really believe in you, if I'm really connected to you the way that I am, then I want to do things with you. I want to connect with you and do, I want to go places and I want to do stuff. Right, and I do understand sometimes how we want to do special things and connect, and some, those things are necessary, right? But we have to understand the purpose behind it, right? Again, it's connecting with each other, not to flex, right? I know we can kind of really get into one of those about that, but it's about the connecting aspect. When we talk about, just staying in that vein, right? It doesn't have to be going to the show, right? Like they were talking about from the Lion's Den, right? We can pray together, right? And again, if there's no competition, then it should be easy work, light work. It should be powerful. Going to service together. I do recommend you guys be a part of the same ministry. Right? I think that's another thing that hurts us too, right? We can be so divided, and well, you stand on your principles and I'm gonna stand on mine. And I've seen it work for some marriages. I've known some couples that have their husbands go to one church and they go to another church, and they might everything seems to be great. That's cool and all, but in the grand scheme of things, that can eventually turn out to be a problem, especially if the philosophies are different, right? And I know we get into you can get into other aspects of different religions and things of that sort, and that's a big deal too. But just even within the Christian body of itself, right? That's a huge thing. Like I said, I've seen it. Sometimes it works, and sometimes it can get left really, really bad. Right? And as a matter of fact, not to get too deep into it, but there's a situation where again, I know there's a lot of pastors that are out here now, especially on the TV, that they're gaining a lot of popularity amongst a traditional kind of perspective, if you will. And that puts a lot of separation, if you will, towards the husbands and the wives. And the wives might be trying to get their husbands to go to the church that they go to, but they'd rather listen to some of the more traditional speakers, if you will. It might not be a problem now, but like I said, it'd be something later. So again, you have to be mindful of stuff like that too. That's very important, right? And as a matter of fact, it's a great segue going into challenges, right? With dating or getting into relationships and subsequent engagements and marriages, right? And heartbreak, all of that, right? There's, again, outside of theological differences or religious differences, we can get into so many other things, right? Again, personality, right? As much as we might overlook some of those little things, because especially with the way that the church works sometimes, we get so wrapped up in trying to present a certain sense of normalcy, we might miss, that dynamic. Right? And like I said, I look at myself in this regard, and one of the things that is huge with me is that I'm an introvert. I don't know if you see me, I'm big, intimidating, imposing looking, right? Or you might see me as just a huge teddy bear, right? But like I said, as I talked about earlier, I can be very, very quiet, right? So if I'm in one of those positions where I'm quiet or seemingly disengaged, you might take that as there's a problem, there's an issue, right? And instead of, really addressing or being able to talk about it and being open and transparent about it, you might feel a certain kind of way. I've been in several discussions like that. And, coming back and admitting, hey, there's nothing wrong. I'm not feeling any kind of way. I'm not in this position. I'm not in that position. Sometimes I just like my peace and quiet. I'm not trying to make anything, like over the top, or, I'm not trying to turn you into a victim of any kind of sort or anything like that. You know what I mean? Because again, I'm trying to be honest. I want to be open and transparent about that. Right? But it still might not register, right? But that can speak to other problems and issues too, right? But that's still a thing, right? And so we got to be mindful of that, right? And again, that goes to as we talked about earlier, right? Being able to tend to the person, to know the person, to cultivate and really invest into that person, right? Because sometimes, a lot of our misunderstandings in reading people or reading situations can cause a lot of extra problems that weren't there in the beginning, right? And, that can create some doghouse moments. That can create a lot of disappointment, right? That can create a lot of heartbreak, right? Like I said, I was in a relationship like that, and like I said, we got into a heated discussion, and it reminded me of a previous situation that I was in, and I completely shut down after that. My body reacted a certain way, and I vowed I'd never go back to that type of situation. And so I didn't say anything. And, like I said, that was, at the time I realized it was an immature thing to do, right? I do understand that it did justify the boundary aspect, right? Because I didn't want to go through that process. But I didn't allow her to know that, which can be frustrating for her, because she might find herself, or she might have found herself in a situation where she did that in another situation, and she might not have recognized that, her approach might have created the scenario, and before you know it, it's all gone. So, we have to be mindful of those things too, right? But Ecclesiastes 7:3, right, talks to us. Sorrow is better than laughter, for by the sadness of the countenance the heart is made better. And it's a process, right? Again, we're allowing ourselves to learn and to grow from those places, right? Again, how can we know what's in us if we're not put through the ringer, put through the fire, right? And I know for a lot of us, we've been taught about how bad things are, usually tricks of the enemy and tests and trials and all these other things. But sometimes, and as we talked about earlier, right, there's a time and place for everything. Sometimes the stresses, right, the struggles, the timing, those things might be necessary. You might find out that, maybe that thing that you wanted, and you think about it like any other thing, right? Imagine, and I'm pretty avid about this from just this aspect. I was during the pandemic, I had bought a PlayStation 4, and I know the PlayStation 5 had literally was a month or two away from coming out. I never cared about staying up on consoles and things of that sort, but I do remember, the PlayStation. I got the PlayStation 4, and the only reason I had gotten the PlayStation 4 was I wanted to do something really unique with a particular basketball game. And so I got the PlayStation 4. I did the thing. It was fun. I enjoyed it. It was great, right? But I thought about all of the anticipation that I had in trying to stay up with that, and I became really kind of frustrated behind it. You know what I mean? Because now here it is. I invested into this thing, and I realized that I could have kept what I already had and been perfectly fine, right? And sometimes that happens, right? Sometimes we want something so bad that we'll do anything to get it, and in that compromising and we getting what we want, we might realize that it wasn't for us in the first place, right? Again, you find not just the in challenges like that, but we can also find during times like that, we can also find that it can become very discouraging, right? We might lose hope. We might believe that things can get worse, or they can get worse, right? But we have to allow ourselves the opportunity to be comforted, right? Again, during those times, those struggles. Proverbs 34 and 18. The Lord is nigh unto them that are of a broken heart, and saveth such as be of a contrite spirit. Right? So again, we understand that it's necessary to go through the wire, go through the ringer. Right? And it's again, for a particular reason. But God is always with us. Right? And we have to be mindful of that. And again, if we're open and open-minded and big-pictured enough, we can understand that there might be in a time and place for that and a reason for it. Right? And like we talked about earlier, it might be necessary to go through that process, and it might not be for the person that we might have been trying to get with, but it might be for the next person. Right? And learning how to, navigate through the ups and the downs of that particular disconnect, right? Or, timing or whatever the case may be. Right? But when we go through those processes, right, one of the things that we have to be very mindful of, and this was kind of talked about in the last section too, is we need to have the ability to cope with those things. Right? Obviously, we need to pray and we need to forgive and get support, right? And get help, right types of guidance, therapy, things of that sort. But being able to get those things off our chest too. Be transparent. Now again, we have to be mindful, right? We don't want to be crass, but definitely, again, let it be known I was disappointed. The transparency factor really helps us, right? And these are the things that God is revealing to us that He wants. And I've talked about that in other episodes before, right? That's necessary. We do have to find, we do have to find those, elements of transparency, if you will, to let us know where we stand. Because how else can we build and grow if we're denying ourselves that opportunity? Okay. And then, as again we talked about, right, all things work together for the giving that love the Lord, right, in accordance with Romans 8:28. If we're trusting the plan, then we'll be able to overcome whatever it is we're dealing with. For those that are in the dating process, if you go through the ringer and you find out that person is not the person that you really want to be invested in or connected to, you can leave. Right? For those that might be in a relationship, in terms of being married, right? If you're finding, and again, this is where the wisdom comes into play. If you're finding that, you guys weren't supposed to be together, right? Utilize the appropriate wisdom. Right? Don't just leave for the sake of leaving, right? It's a little bit more difficult, and I admit that. It's not an easy process, but do know that with regard to, finding that closure, you're doing so in accordance with God's will. Okay. For those, that you were meeting, you were dating, and finding out through that process that it's not what you wanted. Build from that, right? Know what to look for, and be mindful too of, what types of things you can pick up and utilize in the next situation. Right? That I think that is definitely a very helpful thing, and not to look at it from the standpoint of being a victim, right? Or you're, taking your approach, right, from your intention, and just saying that was the way, or I was right, or whatever the case may be. Really be objective about it, right? Some of us really struggle, again, moving forward, moving on in our situations, because we stay taking and blaming, or shifting, or putting responsibility of issues and problems on everything else. Everything is a problem, and not us. Okay. So, in concluding all of this, let's talk about, again, we were reiterating right? We want to make sure that we understand, you know, how faith works, right, in terms of relationships, right? Being able to understand the process of cultivating, that's the purpose, right? Being able to invest in another person, and rightfully so. We want to talk about being on the same page because that's necessary, right? We want to make sure that, you know, when we're working together, we are equally yoked, but equally yoked is bigger than just, you know, the way that we continue to push it and preach it, you know, to believer to unbeliever, personality wise, right? We need to know about the other person, right? And not just basing it off of superstitious type stuff, but we do need to understand and know about who we're dealing with, right? And utilize resources if necessary. And like I said, I do recommend the 5 love languages. I think that is a very great test to use. I also recommend the books. I know there are lots of different levels of 5 love languages. There's couples, there's men, there's women, there's teenagers. Utilize them. Understand them. Right? You and go and learn about how all of these different things are utilized and applied. Know what your strengths are, what your powerful or your biggest influences are, or the ones that you're not so influential, your strengths and your not so strengths, if you will. I also think personality tests are important too, right? You know, Myers-Briggs is a great one, right? There's several different versions of those. There are some that get even deeper, right? But it's necessary to know, right? And again, it's imperative because, you know, one of the worst things we can do to ourselves is mislabel who we are in the process, and then we get treated according to what we say about ourselves, and we realize that we're not the thing that we said, and that could be a whole different thing. But definitely utilize those two, right? And obviously trusting God's word and reading God's word and being able to find out, you know, what God's word says about, you know, how to build a relationship, right? We talk about self-reflection and the inner working, right? Aligning ourselves, you know, understanding the purpose of the soulmate, which is the helpmeet, right? And that's not just a woman thing, but that is for all of us. And as we talked about, you know, several times in different capacities, that's tending to each other. We're supposed to tend to each other, right? That's important. That's imperative, right? Being able to grow and develop, and again, know who we are, know our strengths, know what we're not so strong on, right? Being able to heal appropriately, so we're not bringing in extra baggage, is what some person may have created, or what we might think that someone might tolerate. We might find out otherwise, right? And other things along that line. We also have to be mindful of the divine, right? The divine timing, right? Understand that we have to be patient in this process, whether we're with someone or we're going to get with someone. We have to understand that this is a process, right? And we have to know where we stand on those different elements, those different aspects and things along that line, right? Being able to nurture a relationship appropriately, right? Being able to communicate with each other, and not being crass, but definitely being open and transparent and vulnerable. Like, that's the only way we can build, right? Understanding that we're going to go through our ups and downs, and how to navigate through those ups and downs, right? How to deal with disappointment and letdown and heartbreak and you know, going through the difficult times and being able to, again, trust the process, especially if we're really invested in building with that person, right? When we love the way that God teaches us how to love, in accordance with his word, yes, agape is very important, but there are other elements and aspects to the relationship, especially in an intimate sense, that we have to understand and how to approach them from a purpose place too, right? We have to understand that, and that transformation, if you will, allows us to live deeper into God's will and purpose. Okay. I want you guys to, as we close this out, understand the dynamic of 1 John 4 and 8. Okay. He that loveth not knoweth not God, for God is love. If you don't know what love is, real love, you don't know who God is. Because God is true love. And as we talked about, right, there's different elements. I do recommend going back and reading or listening to that episode, right, about the different aspects. It might be a little juvenile at this point, because there's a lot of growth in the process. But I do recommend still listening to that episode, because there is a lot to take into consideration when looking at the different types of love, and especially in accordance with Greek language. We do also want to make sure that we understand how all of these apply, not just in their compartmentalized sense, but how they're all utilized in the grand scheme of things. And I would also recommend, right, looking at the Hebrew version of the word, which is a one size fits all, as what we're accustomed to when we hear the word love. Our version of love is the same, but understand how they all serve the same purpose and how they're all connected to each other. Okay. Do know that we do love you, and we want what's best for you. Okay, and we want you to find that perfect person that can help build you to become who you're supposed to be, and that you're helping that person become the best version of themselves. And that two becoming the one flesh can go out and really change the dynamic and really push what God's will and purpose is truly about. Dear Lord, Heavenly Father, I thank you for this day. I thank you for the opportunity for us to learn about love, finding our soulmates. I pray, God, that we take the time to really learn about ourselves and to cultivate and really reflect on who we are. I pray, God, that we're taking the time to, find what it is that we need. And not just for the purpose of being able to receive those things, but also being able to learn about how to tend to, or what it looks like to be tended to, so that we can be servants to those that we're responsible for, or we plan to be responsible for. I pray, God, that we find ourselves being able to build nurturing and healthy and purposeful relationships, where we're able to be transparent just as you are with us, and honest and vulnerable just as you are with us. I pray, God, that we're able to really be the examples of what your purposeful relationships are. I pray your will be done in all of our lives, God. I love you and I thank you. These things I ask in your holy and heavenly name. Amen. And I thank you guys again for taking the time to come out and listen to us tonight as we talk about, love and finding that significant other. I do pray that when, you're out there searching for that significant other, that we're not just going out and looking at certain things, she's got this or he's got that, but we're really concerned about the character. We're really concerned about being able to find that person that puts us in a position to be who we're purposed to be. As always, I love you all, and I pray that you all find your success. I pray that you all find your purpose, and I pray that you all find your loves, right? And for those of you that are already committed to someone, I pray that you guys are able to build and to cultivate, even stronger relationships with each other. that you guys give yourselves, if you hadn't been on the same page and you're really committed to each other, that you guys really do commit to each other, and really learn about how to become, the cultivators for each other. And I pray that you guys are able to, really encompass and incorporate in your lives a solid support system that allows for you guys to be able to grow and thrive into the best versions of who you're supposed to be. All right, until next time, ladies and gentlemen, this is the Rebuild Podcast, and I love you all. Peace.
Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this episode and you'd like to help support the podcast, please share it with others, post about it on social media, or leave a rating and review. Tune in weekly as we dive into topics such as finding your calling, overcoming obstacles, building resilience, and strengthening your relationship with God. If you're ready to embark on a transformative journey of faith and personal growth, then join us on the Rebuild Podcast. Together, let's build a solid foundation that aligns with God's will and leads us to a life of purpose and fulfillment.